Welcome to The Digital Difference with Scott Gulliver and Oliver Moradi. Welcome everyone to the first ever episode of the Digital Difference podcast. We wanted to start a new podcast to talk about all things digital in today's companies. So I'm your co-host, Scott Gulliver, and I'm joined this evening by your other co-host, Oliver Moradi. Ollie, do you want to give a quick hi and give a bit of background to yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I've been in a few creative roles over the past 10 years. I started as an assistant television producer on things like America's Got Talent. Did a few independent things as well. And then I moved on to being an instructional designer within the financial industry. I've had a few years doing that. And then more recently, I've taken the role of being a multimedia content designer, supporting digital learning and marketing strategies. That's really me.
Cool, that's great. And as a quick intro to myself, so I've been involved in software development primarily for the past 10 years or so, helping companies mainly through digital transformation products and programs, working with a variety of teams. So lots of experience between the two of us, and we wanted to get together on a regular basis and chat about all things digital and how that's affecting companies these days. So our first topic today, pretty interesting one at the moment. We're recording this right now during the UK lockdown period following the worldwide COVID-19 outbreak. And obviously this is affecting everyone in their personal lives. And it's of course also affecting the way that companies are operating at the moment. You look at pretty much any industry and there's just a tremendous amount of innovation within different companies out there at the moment in order to keep going in these kind of tough times. With the nature of these changes the virus is bringing and the necessity of staying indoors, a lot of this innovation, of course, is using and also producing digital services, which is fantastic to see in our industry. So the topics of tonight's discussion is small steps towards innovation as a company. And firstly, I mean, that's, innovation is a huge topic itself, especially when words like digital transformation are thrown about all over the place. I mean, Ollie, you must have heard this all over the place with companies. It seems to be the hot topic of pretty much every 5 years comes along and there's a new digital transformation going along. So, I mean, innovation itself, I wonder if we just break that down. What are we talking about today?
Right. So for me, innovation is everywhere. It's not just within digital, it's within everyday life. So whatever you do, all the time, there's always going to be something innovative that you're doing, whether you create a new way of, I don't know, eating your breakfast, for instance, or even making your breakfast. So innovation is constantly that. In terms of, if we're going to focus down into digital innovation, for me, innovation is using kind of it's kind of blending that difference between software and design, and then thinking of new ways of how we would present that. So it's always for me, innovation is just thinking of new creative ways of doing something, maybe in a more agile way or in an easier, more straightforward, effective way. And that to me is what I think innovation is. So for me, like Scott, why do you think innovation is important?
Well, I mean, of course, innovation is really, I think, what has to drive businesses these days. We are rapidly moving away from industries or from companies relying on things like manufacturing often, where we're pushing out the same content day in, day out. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned creativity as being one of the core factors, because I think more and more companies are having to rely on that creative edge and being at the forefront of innovation within their industry to really stay effective these days. And as you say, I think that does cut not just from digital, but right across the board. And I think it has to be embraced by the whole company. But of course, that is a larger cultural thing. These things take time, and often there are just smaller steps to get there. So, I mean, how about you, Ollie? Why do you think it's important that companies are innovative in these times?
Well, I think you pretty much summed it up there, Scott. For me, innovation is everything. I don't think companies are innovative enough, but I think innovation is so important because it's constantly moving us forward. New creative ideas, inventing new ways of doing things I think it's really important is the development and the evolution of our business, especially within digital. Digital at the moment, it's such an expansive thing. an element in itself, if you will. And it's, I think, innovation within that is just branching off new ideas and new ways of using it. So, and it just makes business more effective and more agile. I think it's really, really important in terms of growth within a business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, when we talk about where this starts from, I mean, I mentioned that culture is this huge thing that takes time to change, and I think it does. But actually, I think that's one of the core tenets of getting this right often. Lots of companies I've seen often will have IT departments quite often in place to drive a lot of these changes, but without the rest of the company behind it, these things don't happen. And you mentioned right at the start about it being about it being right across the board in terms of innovation, and we can see innovation everywhere. And I just think there's so much opportunity out there for these companies. We talk about kind of the current times, and as we said right at the start, we've seen a lot of companies take some pretty extraordinary steps to develop their core services in these times, and remain competitive and remain in business even. So in terms of kind of the practical steps companies can take, I mean, one that's quite often used, of course, especially within the IT industry and software development especially, are the Agile ways of working. And I wonder, Ollie, if you might kind of introduce Agile as a concept and how we deal with it within the software industry, and how maybe it could apply to the wider business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Agile is this new exciting thing that every business seems to want to take on, but a lot of businesses don't actually understand. Essentially, Agile in itself is working with maybe a little bit more freedom, but also within a shorter period, like to produce more content. Especially within our industry, it's kind of produce more content, but within a shorter period, and it's kind of continuously rolling out. For us within the digital industry, new content consistently over short bursts. So for us, I mean, if you think about within a waterfall structure project management style, you would have your project, you'd have your outline, you'd have your build time, you'd have your testing time, and you have your implementation. I think with Agile, it's more it focuses around more of those short bursts. Do you agree, Scott, in terms of especially within our industry, within digital, it's like when you're creating digital content?
No, I think absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And I think actually Agile, it can often seem like this big scary thing, especially to those companies who hear the word bandied about but don't necessarily understand it. As you've said, Agile at the heart of it is just being able to adapt and change. We do away with these big long programs of work that take months of design, and we know often won't meet the criteria, and we replace that with quick iterative ways of working and thinking even. And if we take that core principle and apply it to any other part of the business, we can easily put those same principles into place. So we think about HR, no longer are we dealing with the huge learning programs, for example, that we're dealing with from days past. We're not designing programs for months on end and then rolling them out. And of course, we've now moved on in the world in terms of what we need to learn and the tools we need to practice. And instead, we're replacing that with just-in-time learning and pieces like that.
Absolutely.
So I think Agile as a concept can be dropped into pretty much anywhere. And of course, as we're seeing today, companies are needing to be agile just to deal with the pretty rapidly changing times that we're in.
I think that's a key word there, Scott, as well as the word rapid. I think that companies are continuously wanting to have rapid results as well.
Sure.
Especially within the digital industry, and this is where innovation comes into it as well. Innovation is expected, but it's not always welcomed. And within our industry, it's very important, especially within the digital industry, of course, it's very important to have rapid content continuously being produced, because it's a demand. And with innovation involved as well, it's producing that new content that is continuously supporting these business goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at the moment it's imperative that innovation is used, not even in the idea of creating the content, and not even the content itself, innovative ways of actually working within Agile itself. for instance, it's using different types of Agile, using Scrum and things like Kanban, and knowing when to apply that. And I think that in itself is just innovative within a project.
Yeah, totally. It's it's a huge leap to take on something like these frameworks, but actually, I think the risk is often seen as something that's bigger than it is. And I think Agile is one of those things that can be dropped in as a almost frame of mind for the company to work in. We are now looking at a company where we don't need to make huge risks on everything we do. We can test things quickly. If they don't work, that's fine. But what it does is start to develop this underlying kind of culture of trying things, testing them, and just seeing what happens.
Yeah, and I think this is where design thinking comes into play, Scott.
So what is design thinking?
So essentially, design thinking is, and I'll use an example here, every business needs a solution. A stakeholder will come to you and they'll need a solution to a problem that they have, or a solution to something a problem that needs to be solved within the business. Mm-hmm. So what we'll do is, I used this word rapid before, is as creatives we'll do some rapid prototyping. So it's not just going to be we have a little design session and then think of an idea and that's what we're going to move forward with it. In the sense of design thinking is, we will have an idea, we'll take it to the stakeholder. Stakeholder will say, I kind of like that. It'll come back down to, come back around to us again, and we'll then prototype another piece of content, and we'll continuously do that until we and the stakeholder are in sync with our idea and exactly what we want, and then we'll go forward from there. So it's basically rapidly producing bits of content and being continuously in communication with your stakeholder to then finally come to a solution that you both agree upon, and then you can start the implementation. The problem is, at the moment, and I find this a lot in business, is that you'll go ahead and you'll have your initial design thinking. You'll have your initial design meetings or what have you, and you'll talk to your stakeholder. You'll ask, they'll provide what sort of solution they want. You'll go away and you'll create something, that's what you'll create. Then you'll finally have that final communication with the stakeholder, and the stakeholder will turn around and say, oh, this isn't really right. And this is where then you'll be going back and forth at the very end of a project timeline, and you'll find that you're running up to a deadline that you don't have time for. Implementation hasn't even come around yet. You're still bouncing these ideas off just to get this one idea right, and then you give yourself very little time to create the content, and this is where errors always come about.
Right.
I think it's very, very important. I think this, Scott, you probably have seen this before as well. I think it's very important to implement design thinking early on, and I think it's also an innovative way to come up with a correct solution. I think it's very, very important.
Yeah. I'd like to say I haven't been there, but of course we all have, where we've spent too long on the wrong solution, right?
Absolutely, and it's it's the most disheartening thing as well when you spend months creating something and finally the stakeholder turns around and said they don't like it. You have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And not only have you wasted time, you're disheartened because you've gone out, you might have created something really good, but it just doesn't suit their needs. So I think this is where design thinking is really, really important in the initial stages of any project, is to basically have that early communication, really. I mean, design thinking, part of it, fair enough, is your rapid prototyping. So you're continuously giving out new ideas. And it's making you more creative because you're having to think of new ways continuously. But the back and forth communication between you and the stakeholder means that you're in sync. It means you're on board with one another. I know a lot of times, I mean, especially where I've been involved in a lot of projects where we've gone and got the stakeholders' needs, and we've gone and built a solution, and it just hasn't been to their liking. And in the end of the day, it's the stakeholder's a customer, really. And if the customer's not happy, what are you going to do? You have to go back to the drawing board. And I think this is where design thinking kind of cuts out miscommunication and gets you both on board.
Yeah, that's some great thoughts there. I mean, I think as well, I would assume you could take design thinking, of course, in the, thinking back to the software world and the digital world, where we have quite clear cut design and implementation and delivery phases. But often, I guess, in the rest of the company, things aren't always that clear necessarily. But I think you could probably take the same principles behind design thinking and again apply it to any process to really help drive some innovation. So, if it's just a process there that's happening time and time again, maybe design thinking could be useful, almost like a spike. We spend some time away from our day-to-day processes and really analyze what could we do here. Let's take it back to basics and really break things down and hopefully come up with a more innovative way of delivering things.
Definitely. So, Scott, one thing on my mind then. So, how do you think companies find time to look at innovation?
It's a great question. So, it is difficult for companies. We are dealing in a world now where we have to be lean by default, and the time just often isn't there to spend extra resource on looking at things we could do outside of our core services, basically. But as we've said, I think it's an important thing to find the time on. And one of the things that can be a big help in this is looking at your core strategy as a company, your core mission as a company, and actually some of your KPIs as well, and align a bit of an innovation strategy around that. I think one of the scary things with innovation to a lot of companies, for one, is this big, scary roadmap that takes a long time to do. I think, as we said, you can use tools like Agile, you can use tools like design thinking, and just some of the principles behind those to break down a longer term strategy into small little goals that we can test along the way. And again, it's that thing of having a general direction in mind of where we're going to go to with innovation strategy, and just attacking it one piece at a time, really, really testing each piece at a time as well. We're not just going to spend time and resource for the sake of it. So I would think with all of that, anytime we're implementing a small change, test it. We should be able to see, is it bringing us more revenue? Is it aligning with our core goals? And if it's not, then we adapt and we learn from that, we move on. And often as well, the time and money spent here in learning is hugely valuable. Your competitors will be doing this, so it's definitely useful to spend the time doing it as a company as well.
Absolutely, and I think that right there is again, it's a big word that you've used, or a big thing you've come across. I think is change, and I think people are so afraid of it within a business, and I think with innovation is a big change. And I think what you just said there is 100% spot on. The culture of a company needs to be pro-innovation. And I think a lot of companies are very anti-innovation. They always promote that they want to be innovative and they want new innovative ideas, but I don't think anybody truly believes it. I think that is because people are scared of change. If something works, they don't know why they want to change it. However, the whole point of innovation is to make what you have better. And I think that people get too comfortable within a business. And I think that it's just people being afraid about innovation itself. And because they know that that's going to bring about a change.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, of course, we've all been there, and I think change is scary to anyone. And I think this is why it's just super important to bring the whole organization along with that change. As you mentioned, culture is important. I think people need to. Yeah, it gets banded around, but it's so true. People need to be able to fail within these situations, and they need to be able to try things and test them. Have an environment where they feel comfortable to try things, and of course, change should be made with in complete transparency. I think the big scary transformational things are often done behind closed doors, and a lot of that leaks out through rumor and speculation, and that's the scary stuff.
Yeah,
people start immediately turning to, am I going to get laid off? What does this mean for my future? And often it just doesn't need to be on that level, especially with smaller companies. Smaller companies for me are the real opportunity here. There's so much they can do in terms of looking outside of the box that they're in and that they've carved out for themselves. And again, when we align back to the mission of a company and why they started, quite often you'll see, so taking for example a tax accountancy company, quite a core service there, lots of experience, and the smaller companies as well are often filled with a bunch of really good people who know what they're doing, and turning some of that into just looking outside the box. Maybe if it's putting your services online, maybe it's talking to your customers in a different way. Just looking outside the box can be a huge opportunity, not just for the company, but actually for the people working their day to day as well. You know, it's an exciting change for a lot of these people. But of course, it's a scary thing without bringing them along for the ride.
And this is the thing. I mean, you used the example there. I mean, I've worked in companies where they've been using the same systems, the same processes over and over and over for the last 10, 15 years because they're too afraid to change from a different process or to change the software, and they're afraid of the culture change. I think, and like you said before, I think it's a very exciting thing for small businesses to do that, because I think it's something that you need to implement early on. And I said before, digital is constantly evolving, it's changing, so we need to constantly evolve and change with it, especially to be, we need to adapt as a business constantly to kind of be successful within the digital industry, I think. I mean, otherwise, if you're using technology or if you're using ways from 5-10 years ago, you're seen as a dinosaur already.
It doesn't take long.
Especially with especially within our industry. I mean, I don't know, 10-15 years ago, Facebook wasn't really a thing. Now look at social media, it's massive. And who could have known that was going to be that was just an innovative idea from one guy who thought, I can talk to my friends over a thing. 10-15 years later, it's a massive marketing, one of the biggest marketing platforms you can have, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so important. And I think that us as small businesses, to implement that culture of change and implement that culture of innovation early on is
absolutely.
Critical.
And I think one thing you mentioned, the kind of day in, day out behind some of these companies, going back to how you make time for innovation. A lot of it is just carving out that time quite decisively. Day-to-day tasks that all companies end up just spending so much time on, that constant grind will of course push things like creative exploration just down to the bottom of the pile. It needs to be seen as an important thing to protect the future of the company, to diversify products, whatever the reason is, it needs to be seen as important to really get the time it needs. So one other thing I want to touch on, as we mentioned, I think there are a lot of steps and certainly smaller steps that don't need to involve huge levels of change that companies can take. What about, as we've said, there are lots of companies out there that just don't seem to change. They're stuck in their ways. They're just maybe too big to move in that way. I'm wondering, Ollie, if you've got any tips for those people who are within those organizations, who are itching to get some innovation within their, whether it be department or the entire organization. And if you've got any tips that we could throw out there for those people of how they might enact some of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the main tip I can really provide from working in a big company myself is to think small. Innovation doesn't need to be big. It doesn't. You don't need to change every single process. You're not going to be successful in a big business to try and do that anyway. I mean, I've seen people try and fail many times. I've seen massive transformation projects try and go through and fail because they take too long and not everybody gets on board. So I think, again, I mean, as most big companies are trying to change, maybe not into innovation, but change that agile way of working, maybe this is where you can be sneaky as a digital creative or as within the digital industry yourself, and just try and make those small innovations. And I think they're the things that make the biggest difference. Don't go too big. It's just some little that you could use, whether it's within just a process. Like I said before, if you just want to start implementing design thinking within a small team of, say, I don't know, you work in a small team of developers, for instance, you just want to start implementing design thinking between yourselves, and you think that's going to be a more effective way of doing things. Just start small and just keep it small for now. The big innovative changes, unfortunately, the hard truth is it does come from a hierarchy, I think. But the small changes come from the lower levels within the business, and they're the ones that make the biggest impact. As soon as you start making enough small innovative changes, you'll see that the company will slowly start moving within that way of being more innovative in itself, because they'll start more and more people. It's a big thing, more and more people get on board with one idea. That idea becomes a single consciousness within itself, and it snowballs like anything. And then before you know it could start actually getting a bit of traction within the business.
Yeah.
So continuous small innovative ideas is probably the biggest thing that I would say for someone working within a big business.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think as another practical tip, I think asking whoever is in charge of kind of your time and resource for time to explore this stuff, even on a short-term basis, is important. Use the business drivers that we've kind of discussed here as a reason. Ultimately everything needs to come back to the business drivers, of course, and just getting that in their language and getting some time for it, and just having a culture, as you say, of testing this stuff, and it will snowball, as you mentioned, Ollie. I think small is good, and it's certainly the start, and that's all any company or person really needs to do here, I think.
Precisely. Absolutely.
Okay, Ollie, so what are some of the common mistakes you see when companies try and take on change like this?
It's following what I've just said, Scott, really. So it's more people trying to be too innovative in a sense. It's people thinking too big.
Sure. Yeah.
You don't need to have this killer idea that's going to be completely new and it's going to affect the whole business, especially if you're within a big business. As I said, innovation can be a small thing, and I think that the common mistake is people think that innovation has to be a complete change, something completely brand new that comes in. It doesn't at all. Innovation could be someone else's idea. Absolutely, it could have already been done. It can already be a process in another business that your mate's just told you about. It doesn't matter. It's still innovative, and if you introduce it into your business, it's still a new idea within your business. It doesn't need to be brand new, out of this world kind of like innovative thought that's going to change the scale of digital and transformation. It doesn't need to be that at all. It could be something small. It could be something that's already been created. It's just using it in the right way. And I think that
Sure.
I think that the common mistake is people think that when people hear the word innovation, they think it has to be something new, swanky, and completely creative, and it doesn't at all. I think that, for me, is the biggest common mistake that people make, really. What about you? What do you think a mistake is within innovation?
I totally agree. I mean, I think one thing that goes hand in hand with that is not testing enough throughout change as well. Going back to these big programs of change, things get implemented in the wrong way far too late, or at least we realize it far too late. And I think just having a framework and a goal in mind at the start before you factor in any work, knowing what you're going to be testing against, whether that's, I'm going to be testing how many more customers I get through the door. I'm going to be testing how much more revenue I get at the end of the month. Having those KPIs almost in mind will help you, and every small change you make should be evaluated, and you'll know whether you're on the right path. And if you're not, that's fine. You can divert your course from there. But it's much better to test and prove that out early in the process, rather than late.
100%, Scott. Like you said, a key word there really is evaluate. Constantly evaluate yourself. Constantly evaluate your work. Have other people evaluate as well. Get involved get other people to get involved in your ideas, really. It's and get people to have a say on your ideas, because at the end of the day, that's what you're building it for. You're not building it for yourself, really. You're building it for yourself and everyone else.
Sure.
So the more people that get involved in saying something, the better, because you'll find innovation there as well. I mean, someone will come out with a creative idea, and it'll start sparking off your idea, your mind as well. You'll get your creative juices flowing, and that's kind of what you want, really. So definitely keep evaluating. That's a big thing I'll always say is send your work out as much as you can, test it, evaluate it.
Yeah, completely agree.
Innovation is great when it's used. Don't be scared of it, and don't make it too big in your mind. At the end of the day, innovation can come from anywhere, and it can be really small, but it's very important for businesses. Overall, what we've been talking about, I think it's very important to have that pro-innovation culture and get it, especially within small business, get it set in early on. And I think the key thing for us really, and for you guys as well, is if you are starting a small business, is to get that culture of pro-innovation in early, and not to be scared of innovation. Innovation is so important to the development of your company, and it's so important to continuously keep with this ever-evolving digital world.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So yeah, I just want to say thanks for listening, guys, and we hope to catch you on the next episode.
See you soon.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. We wanted to let you know a little about our digital agency. We design and build killer experiences and apps, and we also put out a bunch of free content to help companies of all shapes and sizes. Head to fluffdigital.com to find out more. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to keep a lookout for the next episode coming real soon.